The thunder of hooves echoed across the vast Wyoming prairie as Jackson Keene raced toward the plume of smoke rising ominously against the amber horizon. It was the summer of 1873, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the rolling grasslands, painting the world in shades of gold and crimson. Jackson had been tracking a wayward steer when he spotted the telltale signs of disaster, a trail of broken wagon parts, and that terrible column of dark smoke twisting into the evening sky. As he urged his stallion forward, his calloused hand instinctively moved to the Colt revolver at his hip. 7 years working this untamed country had taught him caution, but something in his gut told him to hurry. The mare beneath him, a spirited chestnut named Penny, seemed to sense his urgency, her powerful muscles driving them forward at a breakneck pace. The scene that greeted Jackson as he crested the hill made his blood run cold. A wagon lay shattered, its wooden frame splintered like kindling. One wheel still spun lazily, creaking with each rotation. Boxes and barrels were strewn across the ground, their contents scattered by what appeared to be a violent accident. The wagon's canvas cover smoldered, flames licking at its edges. "Hello?" Jackson called, dismounting with practiced ease. "Anyone alive?" His voice carried across the open plains, but only the whisper of prairie grass answered him back. That's when he saw her, a woman's form, partially hidden beneath the overturned wagon bed. His heart hammered in his chest as he rushed forward, dropping to his knees beside her. With strength born of desperation, he heaved the heavy wooden panel aside, revealing her still figure. She was beautiful, even in her unconscious state. Long auburn hair fanned out around her pale face, and though her dress was torn and dirty, Jackson could see it was finely made. A city woman, he thought. Not the kind who typically ventured into this unforgiving territory alone. "Madam?" Jackson gently brushed dirt from her face, checking for signs of life. To his relief, he felt the faint flutter of breath against his hand. "Can you hear me?" No response. Jackson surveyed the wreckage, looking for any indication of what had happened. The wagon's axle was broken, but that alone wouldn't have caused such destruction. He noticed the scattered belongings: books, a writing desk, women's clothing, and various household items. No sign of any companions. Night was falling rapidly, and with it, the temperature would drop. Jackson knew he couldn't leave her here, exposed to the elements and the dangers that prowled these lands after dark. With careful movements, he gathered the unconscious woman in his arms, surprised by how light she felt despite the voluminous fabric of her dress. "Penny, steady now," he murmured to his horse as he approached. With practiced skill, he managed to lift the woman onto the saddle before mounting behind her, cradling her limp form against his chest to keep her secure. Jackson's homestead was just over an hour's ride away, a modest cabin he'd built with his own hands after leaving the cattle drives behind. He'd purchased the plot of land with savings from 5 years of pushing longhorns north from Texas, determined to put down roots after a lifetime of wandering. The woman remained unconscious throughout the journey, though occasionally she would stir or make small sounds that gave Jackson hope. As his cabin came into view, silhouetted against the twilight sky, he felt a strange sense of trepidation. In all his 32 years, he'd never brought a woman to his home, much less an unconscious stranger with no explanation for her presence in this remote stretch of territory. Jackson carried her inside, laying her gently on his bed, a simple frame with a straw-filled mattress covered in relatively clean linens. He lit a lamp, filling the single-room cabin with warm light, then busied himself building a fire in the stone hearth. Once the flames were crackling steadily, he turned his attention back to his unexpected guest. In the lamplight, he could see a nasty bruise forming at her temple, and her right arm lay at an awkward angle that suggested it might be broken. Jackson fetched water from the barrel outside and found a clean cloth, then carefully began to wash the dirt from her face. "Who are you?" he wondered aloud, studying her features. She was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25, with delicate brows and full lips that were cracked from the dry prairie air. Her hands, though scratched and dirty, showed no calluses or signs of hard labor. Definitely a city woman. As Jackson tended to her wounds, the woman's eyelids fluttered. He froze, watching as she struggled toward consciousness. Her lips moved, forming what seemed to be a word. Jackson leaned closer. "Jackson," she whispered, her voice barely audible. He recoiled in shock. How could this stranger know his name? He'd never seen her before in his life. Before he could question her, she slipped back into unconsciousness, leaving him bewildered and uneasy. Jackson spent a restless night in his rocking chair by the fire, watching the mysterious woman and pondering her impossible knowledge of his name. By morning, he'd convinced himself he must have misheard her. Perhaps she'd been calling for someone else, a husband or brother named Jackson, who might have been traveling with her. As dawn's pale light filtered through the cabin's single window, the woman stirred again. This time, her eyes opened, revealing irises the color of summer sage, bright and alert despite her injuries. "Where am I?" she asked, voice hoarse, attempting to sit up before wincing in pain. "Easy now," Jackson said, moving quickly to her side. "You've had a bad accident. Your wagon's destroyed, and I think your arm might be broken." Fear flashed across her face as she registered his words and took in her unfamiliar surroundings. She drew back against the headboard, eyes darting around the cabin. "Who are you?" she demanded, clutching the blanket to her chest with her good hand. "Jackson Keene. I found you yesterday evening and brought you here to my homestead." He kept his distance, not wanting to frighten her further. "You were alone when I found you. Was anyone traveling with you?" The woman's brow furrowed, confusion evident in her expression. I don't remember." Her voice trembled. "I can't remember anything about the journey." Jackson frowned. "What about your name? Can you tell me that?" She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again, distress plain on her face. "I don't know," she whispered. "Why can't I remember my own name?" "The blow to your head," Jackson explained gently. "Sometimes injuries like that can affect a person's memory. It might come back in time." Tears welled in her eyes. "What am I going to do? Where was I going? I don't understand any of this." Jackson felt a surge of protectiveness toward this lost woman. "First things first, we need to tend to that arm properly. I've sent word to town with a passing rider. Doc Willis should be here by midday." He offered her a cup of water. "In the meantime, you need to rest." She accepted the water with trembling fingers. "Thank you for saving me." "Anyone would have done the same," Jackson replied, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Last night," she began hesitantly. "Did I speak at all? Did I say anything that might help me remember who I am?" Jackson considered telling her about the whispered name but decided against it. It would only confuse matters further. "No, nothing that made sense. Just mumbling." The woman nodded, disappointment evident in her slumped shoulders. "I feel as though I should know you," she admitted quietly. "Something about you seems familiar." Before Jackson could respond, a knock at the door announced Doc Willis's arrival. The elderly physician entered, snow-white beard contrasting with his weathered face. He greeted Jackson warmly before turning his attention to the patient. "Well now, young lady, let's have a look at you," he said kindly, setting down his medical bag. After a thorough examination, Doc Willis confirmed Jackson's suspicions: a broken arm and a concussion, but no other serious injuries. "The memory loss is concerning," he admitted as he finished splinting the woman's arm, "but not uncommon with head injuries. It could return in days, weeks, or never." The woman finished for him, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Let's not borrow trouble," Doc Willis advised. "Rest is what you need now. And a name, I should think. At least until your real one comes back to you. Jackson, who had been watching from across the room, spoke up. Catherine, he suggested. If you like it, that is. We could call you Catherine for now. The woman tested the name on her tongue. Catherine, she repeated. Yes, that will do. A small smile curved her lips. Thank you. After Doc Willis departed with promises to return in a few days, Catherine and Jackson found themselves alone again. An awkward silence filled the cabin as they each contemplated their unusual situation. I can't stay here indefinitely, Catherine finally said. It wouldn't be proper. Jackson nodded. Once you're well enough to travel, I can take you to town. Mrs. Abernathy runs a boarding house. She'd give you a room. But that's at least a week away. Maybe more. I have no money, Catherine realized aloud, her hand instinctively going to her pocket. At least, I don't think I do. We found some items scattered around the wagon, Jackson told her. I'll return to the site tomorrow and see what I can salvage. Maybe there'll be something to identify you, or give us a clue about where you were headed. That night, as Catherine slept in his bed and Jackson made do with a bedroll near the hearth, he found himself unable to rest. The mystery of this woman and her knowledge of his name kept his mind racing. There was something about her that stirred feelings long dormant within him, a desire to protect, to care for another person. After years of solitude, the sensation was both welcome and terrifying. The next morning, Jackson rode back to the accident site, determined to find answers. In the daylight, the destruction seemed even more severe than he'd first thought. The wagon had clearly tumbled down the steep embankment that bordered the trail, its wooden frame shattering on the rocks below. How Catherine had survived with only the injuries she had was nothing short of miraculous. Methodically, Jackson began to collect the scattered belongings. He found several books, novels mostly, along with a volume of poetry by Tennyson. A writing desk had broken open, spilling papers and writing implements across the ground. Most of the papers were blank, but Jackson discovered a half-written letter tucked into a compartment. The handwriting was elegant and feminine, but the ink had blurred from exposure to the elements, making most of it illegible. He could make out only fragments. Arriving in Sweetwater by the end of June. And cannot wait to begin my new position as... The rest was lost, including, frustratingly, both the sender's and recipient's names. One other discovery gave Jackson pause: a small daguerreotype in a silver frame. The glass was cracked, but the image was clear. Catherine standing beside a distinguished older gentleman with a stern expression. Father and daughter? Perhaps husband and wife, though the man appeared at least 30 years her senior, which seemed an unlikely match for a woman of her youth and beauty. Jackson carefully gathered everything he could find, packing it into his saddlebags. As he prepared to leave, something glinting in the dirt caught his eye. Kneeling, he uncovered a gold locket on a delicate chain. Inside was a tiny portrait of a handsome young man with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold a challenge. Jackson snapped the locket closed, oddly discomfited by the stranger's gaze, and added it to his collection. When Jackson returned to the cabin, he found Catherine sitting by the window, her splinted arm resting in her lap as she gazed out at the rolling prairie. She turned at his entrance, and the smile that lit her face sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. I was beginning to worry, she admitted. The hours seem endless with nothing to do but think about all I cannot remember. Jackson placed his findings on the table. I brought back what I could salvage. Perhaps something here will help jog your memory. Catherine examined each item carefully, her expression hopeful at first, then increasingly despondent as nothing triggered recognition. When she opened the locket, however, her reaction was immediate and visceral. She dropped it as if burned, her face draining of color. Catherine? Jackson moved to her side, concerned. Do you recognize him? She shook her head slowly. No, but I felt something when I looked at his face. Not recognition exactly. More like, she struggled to find the words. Fear. I felt afraid. Jackson picked up the locket, studying the young man's face more carefully. There was something arrogant in his expression, a hint of cruelty around the mouth despite his conventional good looks. Perhaps he's the reason you were traveling alone, Jackson suggested. Running away from something or someone. Katherine closed the locket firmly. It's possible, but it feels wrong to make such assumptions when I can't remember the truth. She picked up one of the books instead, running her fingers over the leather binding. At least I know I enjoy reading. That's something. The days that followed settled into a strangely comfortable routine. Catherine's physical wounds began to heal, though her memory remained frustratingly blank. Each morning, Jackson would tend to his small herd of cattle and the vegetable garden behind the cabin, while Katherine busied herself inside, insisting on earning her keep by cooking and cleaning as best she could with one arm in a splint. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, and Katherine would read aloud from one of her rescued books. Jackson, who had received little formal education, found himself entranced not only by the stories, but by the melodious quality of her voice. She had a gift for bringing the characters to life, and he often found himself thinking about them long after she had closed the book for the night. They learned about each other in these quiet moments. Jackson told her of his childhood in Ohio, losing his parents to influenza when he was just 14, and the years he spent working cattle drives from Texas to Kansas before saving enough to purchase his own land. Katherine shared what little she knew of herself, her preferences and habits that seemed ingrained despite her amnesia. She loved sweet foods but disliked coffee. She could sew with remarkable skill but burned even the simplest biscuits. Small things, but they formed the outline of a person. One evening, about a week after the accident, Jackson returned from town with supplies and a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Katherine asked as he placed it in her lap. "Open it and see," he replied, the hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Inside was a dress simple but well made, in a shade of blue that matched the Wyoming sky. Katherine looked up in surprise. "It's beautiful. But I couldn't possibly accept—" "It's practical," Jackson interrupted, his cheeks coloring slightly. "Your other one was nearly destroyed in the accident. Mrs. Howell at the general store helped me choose it. Said it would fit a woman of your proportions." He stumbled over the last word, clearly uncomfortable. Catherine's laugh was like music. "Well, in that case, thank you for this practical gift. I'll wear it tomorrow." And she did. The sight of her in the new dress, her auburn hair brushed to a shine and pinned back from her face, made Jackson's breath catch in his throat. It wasn't just her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful, but the way she carried herself with quiet dignity despite her circumstances. She was a woman who had lost everything, even her own identity. Yet she faced each day with determination and even occasional joy. That afternoon, as Jackson taught Katherine how to fish in the creek that ran near his property, she suddenly went still, her fishing pole forgotten in her hands. "What is it?" Jackson asked, alarmed by her expression. "Ziegler," she whispered. "My name is Katherine Ziegler." Jackson stared at her. "You remembered?" Katherine nodded slowly. "It just came to me, clear as day. Katherine Ziegler, from Boston. I was a teacher there." Her brow furrowed in concentration. "I was traveling west to take a position at a new school in Sweetwater. That's all I can recall, but it's something." "Katherine Ziegler," Jackson repeated, savoring the way her full name felt on his tongue. "It suits you." She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I still can't remember anything about the accident or why I was traveling alone. And that man in the locket, I feel he's important somehow, but I can't place him." "It will come," Jackson assured her, though he wasn't certain it would. Part of him, a part he wasn't proud of, hoped her memory would return slowly. Each day with Katherine brightened his solitary existence in ways he hadn't anticipated. The thought of her leaving for Sweetwater to fulfill her teaching obligation left a hollow feeling in his chest. That evening, Doc Willis made his weekly visit to check on Katherine's progress. He was pleased with the healing of her arm, but concerned that her memory remained largely missing. "The mind is a mysterious thing," he told them as he packed up his medical bag. "Sometimes a complete recovery takes months, even years." "But I remembered my name today," Katherine said hopefully. "Surely that means the rest will follow soon." The doctor nodded cautiously. "It's a good sign, certainly, but I'd advise patience, young lady. And you, Jackson," he added with a pointed look, "might consider finding more permanent accommodations for Miss Ziegler. Tongues are already wagging in town about your arrangement here." Jackson felt heat rise to his face. "I've offered to take her to the boarding house as soon as she's well enough to travel. And I've insisted on staying until I can remember more," Katherine countered. "I can hardly seek employment at a school in my current state, with no recollection of my training or experiences." Doc Willis sighed, clearly recognizing the impasse. "Well, it's not my place to dictate how grown folks live their lives. But consider yourselves warned about the gossip. Small towns run on little else." After the doctor left, an uncomfortable silence fell between them. Jackson busied himself with stoking the fire, avoiding Katherine's gaze. "Perhaps he's right," she finally said. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "You haven't imposed," Jackson replied quickly, turning to face her. "I've enjoyed having you here." Katherine studied him, her green eyes thoughtful. "And I've enjoyed being here, more than I probably should." She looked away, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "But that doesn't make it proper. I'm a schoolteacher, Jackson. My reputation is essential to my profession." The reality of their situation hung heavy between them. Jackson knew she was right. A respectable woman couldn't continue living under the roof of a bachelor without damage to her name. Yet the thought of her moving to town, of returning to his solitary existence, was surprisingly painful. "One more week," he suggested. "By then, your arm will be stronger, and perhaps more of your memory will have returned. Then, I'll take you to Mrs. Abernathy's." Katherine nodded, relief evident in her expression. "One more week," she agreed, "and in the meantime, I'll help you prepare for the cattle auction. You mentioned you needed to organize your records." Jackson grimaced. Numbers had never been his strong suit, and the ledgers where he tracked his small herd's growth and expenses were in disarray. "You don't have to do that." "I want to," Katherine insisted. "It's the least I can do after everything you've done for me." The next morning, Katherine began tackling Jackson's financial records while he rode out to check on his cattle. She had a natural talent for organization and mathematics, quickly bringing order to his chaotic system. By the time he returned for the midday meal, she had created a clear inventory of his herd and calculated the potential profit from the upcoming auction. "You're a marvel," Jackson said, genuinely impressed as he reviewed her work. "I've been putting this off for months." Katherine beamed at his praise. "It feels good to use my mind for something productive, and I believe I was quite good at arithmetic. The calculations came naturally." "Your school in Sweetwater is lucky to have you," Jackson said, immediately regretting his words when her smile dimmed. "Yes, I suppose they are," she replied quietly, "if I ever remember enough to fulfill my obligations there." That afternoon, a fierce storm swept across the prairie, bringing sheets of rain that turned the dirt yard to mud and sent them both rushing inside. Thunder crashed overhead as they secured the cabin against the driving rain, laughing at their drenched appearance. "Here," Jackson said, offering Katherine a towel for her wet hair. Their fingers brushed as she took it, and a jolt of awareness passed between them. For a moment they stood frozen, gazes locked, water dripping onto the wooden floor. Katherine broke the connection first, stepping back and busying herself with drying her hair. "That came on suddenly," she commented, her voice slightly breathless. "Wyoming weather," Jackson replied, moving to stoke the fire. "It can change in the blink of an eye." As night fell and the storm continued to rage, they sat before the hearth, the usual comfortable silence between them now charged with unspoken feelings. Katherine had taken to mending one of Jackson's shirts, her neat stitches closing a tear in the sleeve, while he whittled a piece of pine wood into the shape of a horse. "Jackson," Katherine said suddenly, setting aside her sewing, "may I ask you something personal?" He looked up, curious. "Of course. Why do you live alone out here? A man like you, kind, hardworking, honorable. Surely you could have had a family by now if you'd wanted one." Jackson's hands stilled on the carving. It was a fair question, one he'd asked himself on many lonely nights. "I came close once," he admitted. "There was a woman in Laramie, daughter of a rancher I worked for. We were sweet on each other for a time, but her father had other plans. Married her off to a banker with proper connections." He shrugged, aiming for nonchalance. "After that, I decided it was simpler to keep to myself." "And is it?" Katherine asked softly. "Simpler?" Jackson met her gaze, honesty compelling him forward. "It was. Until you." The admission hung in the air between them, as loud as the thunder outside. Katherine's eyes widened, and for a terrible moment, Jackson feared he'd overstepped, ruined the easy friendship they'd developed. Then she smiled, a small, uncertain thing that nonetheless kindled hope in his chest. "I find myself equally unsettled," she confessed. "Everything in my life is uncertain, my past a blank slate. Yet the only thing that feels real and solid is you." Jackson set aside his carving and moved to kneel before her chair, taking her hands in his. "Katherine, I know this is impossible. You have obligations elsewhere, a life waiting for you to remember it. But I can't deny what I feel for you." "And what is that?" she whispered, her fingers tightening around his. "I love you," he said simply. "I think I've loved you since I pulled you from that wreckage." Katherine's eyes filled with tears. "How can this be happening? I don't even know who I am. Not fully." "I know who you are," Jackson countered. "You're brave and kind, intelligent and strong. Whether you're Katherine Ziegler from Boston or someone else entirely doesn't change the woman I've come to love." She touched his face, her fingers gentle against his weathered skin. "I believe I love you too, Jackson Keene. Heaven help me, but I do." When their lips met, it felt to Jackson like coming home after a long journey. Her mouth was soft beneath his, hesitant at first, then yielding with growing confidence. He cradled her face in his hands, mindful of her still healing arm, pouring years of loneliness and weeks of growing affection into the kiss. They broke apart at last, both breathing heavily. Katherine's face was flushed, her eyes bright with emotion. "What happens now?" she asked. It was a question with no easy answer. Jackson rose and moved back to his chair, needing distance to think clearly. "I won't ask you to abandon your commitments," he said finally. "When you remember everything, if you still want to go to Sweetwater, I'll take you there myself. And if I choose to stay?" The hope in her voice made his heart soar. "Then nothing would make me happier than building a life with you, right here." That night, despite their confessions, Katherine slept in Jackson's bed while he took his usual place by the fire. Their feelings may have changed, but his respect for her remained steadfast. Whatever future they might have would begin properly, with honor. Morning broke clear and bright after the storm, the prairie washed clean, wildflowers nodding in the gentle breeze. Jackson stepped outside to find Katherine already awake, standing at the edge of his property, gazing toward the distant mountains. "Good morning," he called, approaching her with 2 cups of coffee. She turned, smiling warmly, but there was something different in her expression, a clarity that hadn't been there before. "I remember," she said, without preamble. "Everything." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. "Tell me," he urged, handing her one of the cups. Katherine took a deep breath. "I was engaged to be married," she began, her voice steady. "To Elliot Wright, the man in the locket. He's the son of Boston's most prominent banker, and our match was considered ideal in society's eyes." She paused, sipping her coffee. But Elliot? He wasn't the man he pretended to be. In public, he was charming, attentive. In private, he was controlling, sometimes cruel. When I tried to break our engagement, he threatened to ruin my reputation, ensure I'd never teach again. Jackson's hand tightened around his cup. "So you ran?" Katherine nodded. "I had already accepted the position in Sweetwater months earlier, planning to leave after the school term ended. After things deteriorated with Elliot, I decided to leave immediately. I told no one except my closest friend, who helped me escape in the night. I took a train west as far as Cheyenne, then hired a wagon and driver to take me to Sweetwater." "What happened to the driver?" Jackson asked, realizing there had been no body at the accident site. "Samuel," Katherine recalled, her brow furrowing. "He was taking a different route than the usual stage, to avoid any telegrams Elliot might have sent ahead to intercept me. We were attacked by bandits, 3 men who demanded our valuables. When Samuel refused, they shot him." Her voice broke. "They took his body with them, along with my trunk containing most of my possessions. They were going to take me too, but something spooked their horse as a rattlesnake, I think. In the confusion, I managed to climb back on the wagon and flee." "That explains the broken axle," Jackson realized. "You were driving too fast on rough terrain." "I had no idea what I was doing," Katherine admitted. "The wagon hit a boulder and overturned. The last thing I remember is flying through the air, then darkness." She looked at him, her eyes shining with emotion. "Until I heard your voice calling to me." Jackson set down his coffee and took her free hand in his. "How did you know my name?" "That night, you whispered Jackson before you lost consciousness again." Katherine's expression softened. "You told me your name was Jackson Keene the day before, at the general store in Cheyenne. You helped me load supplies into my wagon." Jackson stared at her in disbelief. "I don't remember that." "You wouldn't," she said, smiling faintly. "You were one of dozens of people I encountered that day. But you made an impression on me. You were kind, refused payment for your help, and had the most startling blue eyes I'd ever seen. I remember thinking it was a shame our paths would likely never cross again." Jackson shook his head in wonder. "And instead, I found you on the prairie." The coincidence seemed too perfect, almost fated. "What will you do now that you remember?" "Sweetwater is still waiting for their teacher." Katherine looked out over the rolling grassland, considering. "I made a commitment," she said slowly, "and I've always prided myself on keeping my word." She turned back to him, determination in her gaze. "But I made that commitment before I knew what it was to love someone the way I love you." Hope bloomed in Jackson's chest. "Are you saying—" "I'm saying I need to travel to Sweetwater," Katherine clarified, "to explain my situation and help them find another teacher. I won't leave them without options. But then—" She stepped closer, placing her hand on his chest. "Then I want to come back here. To you. If you'll still have me." Jackson pulled her into his arms, mindful of her healing injuries. "I'll always want you, Katherine Ziegler. Always." Their journey to Sweetwater took 3 days on horseback, with nights spent beneath the stars. Katherine rode pillion behind Jackson, her arms wrapped around his waist, her head occasionally resting against his broad back. They talked constantly, filling in the gaps of their lives, learning each other's stories, hopes, and dreams. In Sweetwater, they were greeted with a mix of relief and concern by the town council, who had begun to fear their new teacher had abandoned them. Katherine explained her situation honestly, including the attack and her memory loss. When she spoke of her decision to stay with Jackson, she expected resistance or disappointment. Instead, she found understanding, particularly from the council chairman's wife. "Love isn't something to walk away from, my dear," the older woman told her, patting her hand. "Teachers can be replaced. True companionship is far rarer." Fortunately, the schoolmaster's daughter in a neighboring town had recently completed her teaching certificate and was eager for a position. Within a week, all arrangements were made, and Katherine found herself free to choose her own path for perhaps the first time in her life. Their wedding took place on a perfect autumn day, with the aspen trees turned gold against the azure sky. It was a simple ceremony in the Sweetwater Church, attended by a handful of Jackson's neighbors and newfound friends from town. Katherine wore a cream-colored dress with lace at the collar, not the elaborate gown her Boston upbringing might have dictated, but one that suited the woman she had become. Judge Morrison, who performed the ceremony, smiled broadly as he pronounced them husband and wife. "I believe this is the part where you may kiss your bride, Mr. Keene." Jackson needed no further invitation. He gathered Katherine into his arms and kissed her with all the love that had grown in his heart since pulling her from the wreckage of her wagon. As they broke apart, cheers erupted from the small congregation, none louder than Doc Willis, who took full credit for seeing the romance brewing from the start. That night, as they lay together in their cabin, now truly their home, Katherine traced the lines of Jackson's face in the moonlight that spilled through the window. "What are you thinking?" he asked, capturing her hand and pressing a kiss to her palm. "I'm thinking about fate," she replied thoughtfully. "How the worst day of my life led me to the best. If those bandits hadn't attacked, if the wagon hadn't crashed, if I hadn't decided to track that stray steer," Jackson added. "Exactly. So many things had to align perfectly for us to find each other." She nestled closer to him, her head finding its place on his shoulder. "It makes me wonder if some things are simply meant to be." Jackson considered this as he stroked her hair, now loose around her shoulders. "I don't know about fate," he said finally, "but I do know that I'd search 100 prairies and pull you from 100 wrecked wagons if that's what it took to find you." Katherine laughed softly, the sound vibrating against his chest. "Let's hope that won't be necessary. One near-death experience was quite enough for me." As winter settled over the Wyoming territory, bringing snow that blanketed their land in pristine white, Katherine and Jackson fell into the rhythms of shared life. She took to ranching with surprising enthusiasm, learning to ride properly and help with the cattle. Jackson, in turn, allowed her to enhance his rudimentary education, spending evening hours improving his reading and mathematics. They faced challenges, of course. Katherine's first winter in Wyoming tested her endurance, with temperatures far colder than anything she'd experienced in Boston. A telegram arrived in December bearing news that Elliot Wright was making inquiries about her whereabouts, prompting a tense week until a return message from Katherine's friend assured them he'd been diverted with false information about a move to California. But through it all, their love only deepened. Jackson, who had once resigned himself to a life of solitude, found joy in the simple domestic moments, Katherine humming as she kneaded bread, the scent of her hair as she leaned against him before the fire, the sound of her laughter when he told stories of his cattle-driving days. For Katherine, who had lived by others' expectations for so long, life with Jackson offered freedom she'd never imagined. He encouraged her to speak her mind, valued her opinions, and treated her as a true partner. When she expressed interest in teaching again, he helped her establish a small school in their home for the children of nearby ranchers, who previously had to travel to town for education. Spring brought new beginnings. The prairie erupted in wildflowers. Calves were born to Jackson's growing herd, and Katherine discovered she was expecting a child of her own. When she shared the news with Jackson, his eyes filled with tears of joy, and he lifted her in a gentle embrace that expressed everything words could not. "I never thought I'd have a family of my own," he confessed that night as they lay together, his hand resting protectively over her still flat stomach. Growing up an orphan, then living the life of a drifter, it didn't seem possible. Katherine covered his hand with hers. "You deserve all this happiness and more, Jackson Keene. Our child will be the most loved little one in all of Wyoming territory." Their daughter, Emma Rose Keene, was born on a crisp October morning, with Doc Willis presiding and declaring her the prettiest baby in 3 counties. She had her mother's green eyes and her father's determined chin, a combination that delighted them both. Life settled into a new pattern with Emma at its center. Jackson expanded their cabin to include a proper bedroom and nursery, using skills he'd picked up from years of making do on the range. Katherine's small school grew to 8 students, ranging in age from 6 to 13, all eager for the knowledge she shared 3 days each week. As Emma's first birthday approached, Katherine received a letter that caused her hands to tremble. "It's from my parents," she told Jackson, her voice hushed with disbelief. "They've finally found me." Jackson set down the harness he'd been mending. "What do they say?" Katherine scanned the pages, emotions playing across her face. "They were frantic when I disappeared. Elliot convinced them I'd been kidnapped or worse." She looked up, her expression pained. "They've been searching for me all this time." "Do they know about us? About Emma?" Katherine nodded. "My friend Clara finally told them the truth after Elliot became engaged to someone else. They want to come visit, to meet you and their granddaughter." Her voice held a mixture of hope and apprehension. "What do you think?" Jackson considered the implications. Katherine's parents were wealthy Bostonians, accustomed to luxuries his modest ranch could never provide. Would they look down on their daughter's choice? Try to convince her to return east? But looking at Katherine's face, seeing how much their approval meant to her, he knew there was only one answer. "Tell them they're welcome here," he said, reaching for her hand. "This is your home, and they're your family." The Zieglers arrived the following spring, their fine clothes and formal manners initially creating an awkward atmosphere in the simple cabin. But Emma, now a toddling 18-month-old with her father's charm, quickly broke through the tension, captivating her grandparents with her bright smiles and curious nature. "She's extraordinary," Mrs. Ziegler said on their 3rd evening, watching as Emma attempted to help Jackson stack wood by the hearth. "And so are you, Mr. Keene. I can see now why our daughter chose this life." Mr. Ziegler, more reserved than his wife, nevertheless nodded in agreement. "I had my doubts," he admitted. "When Clara told us Katherine had married a rancher in Wyoming, I imagined." He gestured vaguely. "Well, something quite different from what I've found here. You've built a good life together." Katherine, who had feared her parents' judgment, felt tears of relief spring to her eyes. "Thank you, Father. That means more than you know." Before the Zieglers departed 2 weeks later, they left a gift funds to build a proper schoolhouse on Jackson's land, with room for up to 20 students. "An investment in our grandchild's future," Mr. Ziegler called it, though both Katherine and Jackson recognized it as an olive branch, an acknowledgement of their chosen path. That autumn, 5 years to the day since Jackson had pulled Katherine from the wrecked wagon, they stood together on the porch of their expanded home, watching Emma chase fireflies in the twilight. Katherine's second pregnancy was just beginning to show beneath her simple dress, a brother or sister for Emma due with the spring thaw. "Do you ever regret it?" Jackson asked suddenly. "Staying here with me instead of pursuing the life you planned?" Katherine looked up at him, surprised. "Never," she said firmly. "Not for a single moment. Even when winter seems endless, Or when the roof leaks? Or when your students test your patience? He persisted, a hint of insecurity in his voice. Katherine turned to face him fully, taking both his hands in hers. Jackson Keene, listen to me. Before I met you, I was running away from a life others had chosen for me. Here, with you, I found something I never knew I was seeking, not just love, but purpose, partnership, freedom to be exactly who I am. She guided one of his hands to rest on her growing belly. This is the life I was meant for. You and Emma, and this little one and whatever other adventures await us. Standing on tiptoe, she pressed her lips to his, pouring 5 years of certainty into the kiss. When they broke apart, Jackson's eyes were suspiciously bright. You know, he said, his voice rough with emotion, I still have that locket. Found it again last week when I was cleaning out the storage chest. Elliot's locket? Katherine asked, surprised. I thought we'd lost it years ago. Jackson shook his head. Been meaning to ask if you wanted to sell it. Gold would fetch a good price. Might help with the cost of that new plow we've been eyeing. Katherine laughed, the sound carrying across the twilit prairie. By all means, sell it. I can't think of a better use for Elliot Wright's image than to help our ranch grow. As darkness fell completely, they called Emma inside, the three of them soon to be 4 moving through the comfortable routines of family life. Later, as Katherine watched Jackson tuck their daughter into bed with a story about brave cowboys and the treasures they sometimes find on the open range, she felt a wave of gratitude so profound it brought tears to her eyes. From tragedy had come joy, from loss, the greatest gain. The wagon crash that had stolen her memories had ultimately given her something far more valuable, a love story written not in the pages of her beloved books, but in the shared moments of a life built together on the wild Wyoming prairie. And as Jackson joined her in their bed that night, his arms encircling her with the same gentle strength that had once lifted her from the wreckage, Katherine knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be, home, in the embrace of the man who had not only saved her life, but had given her a life worth living.